and welcome to Spotlight on Bensenville. I'm Annie Jaworska, your village trustee, and today's host for this episode. Today we will be discussing vaping, more harmful than you might think, with our guest, Matthew Quinn, Community Relations Coordinator at Rosecrans Health Network. Hi, Matt.
Hey, how's it going, Annie?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what exactly do you do with Rosecrans?
Sure. With Rosecrans, as you mentioned, I'm a community relations coordinator,
Okay.
which really is a way of putting it, I do outreach in the community. So that means I connect with hospitals, I connect with schools, therapists, psychiatrists, just to collaborate and share information on our services so that we can make sure we're getting clients appropriately placed, whether that's our substance abuse services at higher levels, residential, recovery home, or a client may need an outpatient therapist, which we typically don't do at Rosecrans, or a psychiatrist. So that's my role in the western suburbs, is to connect with other professionals to link resources so that we're placing clients appropriately.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know that vaping is it's a hot topic right now, and I know that you do a lot of community presentations regarding vaping and many other variety of topics. So can you just tell us a little bit more about, what is it?
Sure.
And why is it a problem now?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the big thing is, and we were just talking about this just a second ago with the Illinois Youth Survey data coming out and how it's doubled in the past 2 years, whereas alcohol is down a little bit and marijuana is the same. And I think the huge rise, a lot of it is just the nature. So the term vaping, where that all comes from, it's short for vaporizing, which means it's heating a chemical, oftentimes a liquid, to the point where it releases a substance that's then inhaled. And oftentimes it has nicotine or may have marijuana, those types of chemicals in there. Something I always like to mention right up front is that the term vaping is kind of misleading, because when you hear of vapor or vaping, oftentimes people will think of a humidifier or steam coming off of, somebody's making pasta. And a lot of these devices are flavored with mint or other things like that. Like, what else is mint? Gum, So a lot of kids are falling into the trap of thinking it's harmless because they think of vapor and they think of a humidifier and then they think of mint, like gum.
Right.
And it's easy for teens to fall into the trap of thinking it's not that big a deal.
Right.
So a lot of what I talk about is just trying to provide more information about that there's a lot more to the story than just harmless vapor.
Right, and more to the story than just the vaporizer and the steam and the flavors involved.
Right.
So can you tell us, a little bit more about vaping, e-cigarettes, and what are like the FDA requirements of these, and exactly what chemicals does vaping and e-cigarettes produce?
Sure. So this all started about 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay.
And that's where the term e-cigarette, it's kind of morphed from e-cigarette to vaping.
Okay.
5 or 10 years ago, the term used to be e-cigarette. That was kind of how it got introduced. And how it came into the market was, it was kind of promoted as being a way for people to get off cigarettes, which kind of opened the door, because in a lot of ways that sounds like a noble cause, to transition from something that is smoking to something that is still maybe nicotine but might have less carcinogens in it. The problem is, in the past few years with a lot of these devices, which I'm sure we'll get into, a lot of them, the way they look, the way they're flavored, the way they're advertised, even though explicitly these companies are saying that it's an alternative to smoking, really when you kind of dig deep and look at the implied marketing, you could kind of tell that there's a little bit of targeting toward youth based on reading between the lines and recognizing the bubblegum flavor and the fact that the Juul looks like a USB drive, so it could be very discreet. These devices are very discreet, so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who the kind of implied market is with that. The FDA has their hands full. To their credit, I think they're realizing how big of a problem this is. The director of the FDA put out a statement a couple months ago in the spring, specifically geared toward action steps that they're going to take to try to get this under control. They're trying to go to vendors that might be finding vendors that might be either online or gas station. They've doing sting operations to try to get people from selling to underage people that are under the age of 18. But the problem is if, and I've done this before just out of curiosity, but I've gone online and looked at these vendors online that sell these devices, and there's really still not much of an age verification system. It's oftentimes a yes or no question, which legally at that point they're kind of covering themselves because that's technically an age verification, even though I highly doubt a 16 or 17-year-old is going to click, are you 18? Generally speaking, they're not going to say, you got me. They're gonna say, yes, I'm 18, and then it sends you to the cart and you purchase it. So there's still a lot of work to be done. At this point, the FDA is mandating that all these companies release what chemicals are in the liquids. But the problem with that is that the important things are what are the chemicals that are being released when it's heated, and there hasn't been a lot of disclosure yet in terms of what some of the carcinogens that are released when it's heated, and some of the carcinogens that are in the flavoring agents.
I see.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, as you mentioned, the e-cigarettes came out 10 years ago.
10, 15 years ago in that neighborhood, yeah.
And it seems like it was more, to help people to stop smoking.
Right.
And now it's kind of morphing into something else. And
Right.
now adolescents are starting to utilize e-cigarettes, which now the trend is more so leading towards vaping.
And the interesting thing is that there's a growing body of research that's showing that they're not particularly effective at getting people to quit cigarettes.
Okay.
Oftentimes people will use them for a period of time and go back to cigarettes. Or they maybe become just addicted to the vapes themselves and never really get off of those, in which case they're still addicted to the nicotine. Even though there may not be some of the carcinogens in the smoke, they're still addicted.
Okay.
And they're finding that a lot of kids that start using these devices have a much higher risk of then moving to cigarettes, because there may be a situation where they don't have access to a vape, but they have access to cigarettes, and they'll start doing that. Might be a different buzz for them, and all of a sudden they start smoking cigarettes more. So a lot of the initial reason why they were promoted is kind of proving to have kind of iffy backing behind it, research-wise.
I see. And so with that, when did you notice that now vaping is becoming more prevalent with adolescents? Has that been in the last 10, 15 years, or
No,
has
really,
it been
this
more
has been
recently?
in the past 2 years.
2 years, okay.
And even more so just in the past year, I would say has been a big explosion.
Okay.
It was kind of starting to crank up about 2 years ago, but just in the past 12 or 18 months, there's been a huge, and that's the youth survey data shows that. They do that every 2 years with 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And so the last one was in 2016. And then this past spring, and this is this is tens of thousands of kids throughout the state. So from 2016 to 2018, basically it's doubled. In contrast to, like I said, with alcohol, it's down about 2%. Marijuana's pretty flat. I mean, we're talking increases from 12 to 26% in terms of 12th and 8th graders that have used it in the past 30 days, up from 13 to 24% in terms of the first-time users in the past year. So these are huge jumps in just a 2-year period. Those are oftentimes the numbers that you'll see over a 10 or 15-year period. If there's an increase, that's a huge jump. So it's really concerning.
Right, and I did see that in the statistics with the Illinois Youth Survey. Why is there a huge increase in using e-cigarettes and vaping? Why has it gone from 12% in 2016 to 26%?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a couple of main reasons. One is, and there's a great study that's actually on the FDA website that they did. This was a few years back when vapes started to get used more and more. That 81% of teens reported that they started using these devices because of the flavoring agents.
Okay.
And when you talk about the flavoring agents, it's really kind of mind-boggling and scary what they are. They're Cocoa Pebbles. Every bubblegum, any creme brulee, mango, any flavor you could possibly imagine is out there. And it doesn't, again, it's pretty easy to tell who they're targeting when they're talking about Lucky Charms. And it's very obvious that they're not necessarily targeting adults. So that's one reason. Two is just the nature of these devices. Very discreet, small little, it's not even really, it's this tiny little puff. If a kid's in a school bathroom, if they're in a stall and there's a dean that's somebody that's standing outside the stall and somebody uses one in the bathroom, there's not going to be that smell. There's not going to be that big cloud of smoke that rises above the stall. You're not going to be able to tell much of anything. So the discreet nature makes them a lot more appealing to kids because they could get away with it.
Right.
And just nicotine itself. Nicotine's a very addictive drug.
Okay.
And so I think you've seen a lot of kids, I've heard of kids using these 60, 70 times a day because they're able to use them in the bathrooms. Some kids are using them in the classrooms, just getting really, really quickly addicted to the nicotine. So there's several reasons why these have really kind of exploded, and there's a lot of marketing. You know, they know kids are on Snapchat, on Instagram. They know where to market.
Right.
And so I think the FDA and the government really needs to follow the blueprint that they follow with cigarettes in terms of other than menthol, you can't flavor cigarettes, you can't advertise cigarettes. They're heavily taxed. So there's a good blueprint out there in terms of how to get these numbers to start coming back down. But at this point, that hasn't been implemented. I think there's still a lot of fact finding, and they've asked Juul, which is one of the biggest, definitely the biggest vaping product among youth. They've reached out to them they want their marketing information. They're really kind of digging into what's going on there to try to seek out more information and to kind of put a plan together. But right now, it's still kind of in that fact finding. What do we do? There hasn't been a whole ton. They're talking about banning flavor. I saw that the other day that they're talking about banning flavors for these devices, which that would be a great first step. Because 81% of kids, that's the attraction. A lot of kids don't know there's nicotine in them.
And they don't know the harmful effects.
Right, exactly. So that's what I spend a lot of time working with schools, working with parents, doing parent presentations to try to get them to understand that this is a lot more than they might realize.
Than just vaping and the flavors.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, that is all really good information. We're going to take a little bit of a break right now, and then we're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about the health concerns with vaping and how people and parents can find more information about this and resources as well. So we'll be right back after this short commercial break.
The Water's Edge Aquatic Center is conveniently located in the Redmond Recreational Complex in Bensenville. The Water's Edge is home of Fenton High School and Wahoo swim teams, featuring an indoor 8-lane lap pool and diving well. The Aquatic Center is available for private functions and parties. Learn to swim, stay in shape, or enjoy recreational swimming year-round at the Water's Edge Aquatic Center.
The Bensenville Community Library, serving a community of readers. Whether you're old or young, a lover of words, music, or computers, the library has something for you. Check out our new Kindles, toddler jams, story and movie nights, or a variety of other activities offered. For more information, call us at 630-766-4642 or check out our schedule on the web at benlib.org. The Bensenville Community Library, celebrating 50 years of library service. Staying connected is important, and at the Village of Bensenville, it has never been easier to keep up to date with what's happening around town. Whether on your phone, desktop, or tablet, the Village of Bensenville website is your go-to community resource, so you'll stay connected at home, in the office, or on the go. Join us on social media. Visit the Bensenville homepage and click on the Facebook icon. This will take you to the Bensenville Facebook fan page. Once there, click the like button and add us to your newsfeed. To follow us on Twitter, visit the Bensenville homepage and click on the Twitter icon. This will take you to the Bensenville Twitter page. Once there, click the follow button and add us to your Twitter feed and receive regular community updates. For email and cell phone notifications, click on the Notify Me button. This will take you to the Notify Me dashboard. Add your email address and/or cell phone number at the top of the page. Then select which service you would like to receive updates from. Click on the envelope icon for email alerts and on the phone icon for phone alerts. You can choose one, the other, or both. Tune into our public access cable shows and board meetings. Choose a current program from the Multimedia tab down on the homepage. Bensenville Community Television is also web streamed 24 hours a day. To pay your Bensenville utility bill online, just click on the Online Payments button, then follow the instructions provided on our secure payment site. If you have any problems, concerns, or questions to tell the Village, please visit the Report a Concern Center. Through the YourGov application, you can explain your issue and track its progress from submission to completion. Issues submitted through YourGov are forwarded directly to the responsible department. Staying connected is important, and at the Village of Bensenville, it has never been easier to keep up to date with what's happening around town. On your phone, desktop, or tablet, the Village of Bensenville website is your go-to community resource, so you'll stay connected wherever you are.
Hi, and welcome back to Spotlight on Bensenville. I'm Annie Jaworska, your Village Trustee, and your host for this episode. Today we are discussing vaping, more harmful than you might think. And I'm here with our guest, Matthew Quinn, Community Relations Coordinator at Rosecrans Health Network. So in our last segment, we talked a little bit more about what is vaping, the different types of products, as well as some statistics. But what are some health concerns with vaping and e-cigarettes that we know about with adolescents?
Sure. Yeah, there's really three main things to be concerned about if you're a teen or a parent of a teen. The first thing is just the actual chemicals in that. I don't even like to call it vapor. I like to call it an aerosol because it's actually more of an aerosol in terms of its consistency than it is vapor. So I always tell kids, and they kind of sit back when I say this, it's more consistency-wise in terms of the number of chemicals. It's almost more like what comes out of a can of hairspray than the steam that comes off a humidifier. So sometimes kids or parents will be kind of surprised by that. So the reality of it is because you are taking out the smoke, there are carcinogens that are eliminated, but there are still dozens of carcinogens that are still in there. And unfortunately, because teens have kind of a black and white way of thinking, they think, okay, it's not smoke, so it must be harmless. Not realizing that maybe instead of 100 carcinogens, it has 50. But it still has 50 carcinogens in terms of propylene oxide, formaldehyde, acrolein, all these terms that you and I probably aren't that familiar with.
Sure.
But are carcinogens that are in cigarettes and are carcinogens that are in these devices too. A lot of people don't know a lot of the flavoring agents that kids will say, well, I don't do it for the nicotine or the other carcinogens, I do it for the flavoring agents. But in a lot of ways, the flavoring agents themselves can be just as harmful. Diacetyl is linked with this popcorn lung, which is a really kind of chronic condition that can lead to needing lung transplants and those types of things. So there's still a ton of carcinogens in these devices, even though there's not the quote-unquote smoke in there.
Okay.
The other thing is, I've just found this out kind of doing my own research, is that when you take in, say, this aerosol versus smoke, your lungs and your immune system really aren't good at differentiating between smoke and this aerosol in terms of your response. In other words, there's still the same response, the same T cells and all of that stuff, and damage of the healthy tissue around the carcinogen in your lungs. It's not like your immune system says, well, this is vapor or this is aerosol, so we'll just send kind of half the troops. It's still the same response. So in other words, you're doing a lot of the same damage to healthy tissue because your immune response is virtually the same, whether it's vapor or it's smoke, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that is.
And there's a kind of a growing body of research with that.
Okay.
The other thing is brain development. There's been a lot of research, and that's a big thing that I'm into. Not only with marijuana, with alcohol, but nicotine. Nicotine itself really impairs brain development, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, that front part of the brain that's responsible for judgment and decision making. All these really important factors in terms of functioning.
Right.
Nicotine, especially with teens, in that 12 to 18-year-old age range, it's really damaging in terms of brain development. So you have the carcinogens, you have that immune response, you have the brain development. That's information that I feel like isn't out there enough. So I like to play a role and try to get parents to realize, and students and teens too, to realize that there's a lot more to this, that it's a lot more harmful than they might realize.
Sure. Especially with brain development, because their brains are still
right. 25, they say, is kind of the general cutoff, is that the brain's rapidly developing up until about the age of 25. So that's really significant for 13, 14, even 17 or 18-year-old potential.
Right, absolutely. And so there's still more research that has to be done on that portion of it.
And a lot of that is underway right now, just because this is such a growing thing. I think there's a lot of research that's being done currently that will kind of add on. But I think the problem is that long-term studies kind of dictate a lot of terms with this, right? Meaning that with this, does it increase risks of lung cancer? We won't know a lot of that for 15 or 20 years.
Okay.
But I don't think we have the time to wait 15 or 20 years to see how harmful these are.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot, because there's all these carcinogens that are still in there, and the relation between those carcinogens and cigarettes and lung cancer, there's a lot you can still kind of piece together without needing those longitudinal studies to know all the harmful impact, the harmful impacts it's going to have.
Right. That makes sense. And so, in terms of the different vaping and different products out there, can you tell us a little bit more about what a Juul is? Juul.
Sure.
What does that look like? And how do adolescents even get access to Juuls?
I remember this was maybe 2 years ago, the first time I heard about a student mention it. I Googled it. I typed in JEWEL, and I'm finding pictures of diamonds. And so it took me a while to realize that it was spelled differently. But since then, obviously now I think anytime they're making the verb form juuling, that tells you how popular it is.
Sure.
The big thing, and I think one of the reasons why it's by far the most popular, is because it does literally look like
a thumb drive.
Right. I've worked with schools where before they knew about it, they were putting it in with the lost and found with the phones and the eyeglasses because they thought a student had lost their flash drive. Fortunately, now I think school staff are getting a little wiser and starting to recognize it because of how much media attention's been drawn to it. So it's just so discreet. And the flavors, like I mentioned before, the mango, the creme brulee, the mint, there are all these flavors that are very appealing. But really, in a lot of ways, it was just one of the first products to come on the market that it was just very clearly discreet.
Okay.
Since then, there's the Fix, Phix. There's the Sorin, Suorin. The Drop is the real popular one. It's shaped kind of like a teardrop.
Okay.
That's one that really kind of gained in popularity this past school year because it's refillable. Whereas with the Juul, there's kind of these cartridges that you have to kind of use and then replace. Each cartridge is about the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes, which a lot of parents are shocked by.
So if a parent notices, if they suspect, if they see like a Juul or a Fix or any of these other vaping or e-cigarette products in their teen's room, how do parents approach their teen about this? And what can they do if it really is a vaping product?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is, and this is true of a lot of things, this is true of cell phones and is the idea of privacy. I think needs to be a little different with the relationship with teens and parents. In other words, the first thing I would tell a parent is if they suspect their teen is using one of these products, search their room, check their phone. And if parents say, well, that's invading their privacy, that's a different situation. This is for their safety. This is for their well-being.
Sure.
And that's your room. That's your cell phone. You're paying for it. So that's a whole different situation. And I would be even tempted to do that before I would even necessarily have that discussion, because if you have that discussion, they might then go in their room and hide it somewhere else that's more discreet.
Right.
So I know that sounds sneaky, but sometimes as a parent, you have to kind of be an investigator, and really kind of dig in a little bit. If you find it, or if you have evidence of it, certainly you want to sit down. And I think the biggest thing is making it clear and providing education for your teen about some of the stuff we've talked about.
Sure.
So they understand when a parent isn't going to permit this or is going to set boundaries with this, that they have a reason.
Right.
That they're not just doing it to be difficult or be challenging or to control.
Right, that they're doing it because they care about their teen.
Right. But I think the important thing is to not continue to over and over again go back to the argument about what it does. At some point, kind of that has to stop. We've presented, now it's just about enforcing a boundary with it.
I see.
And taking them away. And again, they even sell, this is a relatively new thing, to me at least, in terms of being able to test for nicotine. You could buy home drug testing kits that test for nicotine online.
Okay.
So you can monitor it, which I would encourage parents to do, especially if they've caught their kid doing it, is to just buy it, and even if you don't end up using it, I think it could be a great deterrent if the kid knows that you have the ability to test for that at home. So those would be the first things to come to mind.
Okay.
Aside from reaching out to, if there's a social worker or somebody at school that's a trusted, or somebody in the community that they can reach out to, that would definitely be kind of a next step if they're having a challenge kind of keeping it controlled at home.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what resources would you recommend if parents wanted to learn more about this?
Yeah, so hopefully we'll put up resources. I put together a whole sheet of resources that kind of a lot of where I got this information from.
Okay.
Parents can also go on the NIDA website, which is the National Institute on Drug Abuse. I think it's just NIDA.gov, I think.
Okay.
And then SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association. I think they have a different website, but if you just type in SAMHSA, it'll come up. And they have a wealth of research. I mean, you could find education on every drug imaginable, including e-cigarettes and vaping, in addition to the resources that are listed on that page. Those would be a great start. Certainly people can reach out to me. If they want to email me, they could just email me at mquinn@rosecrance.org.
Okay.
Real easy, just MQUINN at ROSECRANCE.org. They could contact me there and I'd be happy to talk to them or email them more information, whatever is going to help.
Right. Well, thank you so much,
Sure.
Matt. I think you're really a valuable resource. You are an expert, in this subject and many other subjects, and I'm so happy that you're here with us.
Sure.
And that
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And that, parents in the community can reach out to you if they have any questions about this, since there's a lot more to this. So thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week for Spotlight on Bensenville.